Chapter 6. After we left the forest, the road to the dry towns stretched out before us, free of any hidden dangers. Some of us had sustained injuries from the catmen, causing us to limp or favor a clawed limb for a day or two. But I knew that Carol was right. It was rare for a caravan to only face one attack. Quinn's words continued to haunt me. After spending a few nights pondering over his cryptic message, I was convinced that the signal wasn't meant for the catmen. His urgent question, "Where's the girl?" echoed endlessly in my mind, leaving me confused and disoriented. Who did he mistake me for? What did he think I was involved in? And most importantly, who were the others that needed to be signaled, even if it meant risking an attack by the catmen that ultimately led to Quinn's death? With Quinn gone, and Carol believing that I had saved his life, I found myself shouldering a significant portion of responsibility for the caravan. Strangely, I enjoyed it, relishing in the momentary respite from the constant threat of blood feuds, spying, and exposure. During those days and nights on the trail, I slowly began to reclaim my identity as a dry-towner, but I knew that I would soon regret it when the walls of Shainsa appeared on the horizon, pulling me back into my own quest and away from the relative safety of the caravan. We veered off the main path to Shainsa, and Carol, my companion, announced our detour to Canarsa, a walled city of non-humans that was not often visited. I expressed my surprise, but Carol explained that he had trading connections there and that we could rest for a day. He also suggested that I sell my lenses there, as the Silent Ones, the non-human residents of Canarsa, would pay a better price than humans in Ardcaran or Shainsa. I hesitated, as I had never been to a non-human town before, but Carol had saved my life from the catmen, so I felt obligated to follow him. On Coruscant, humans and non-humans lived together, but I knew that I could not pass for a native Coruscantan among the non-humans, as Lyric had warned me. Nevertheless, I accompanied Carol, carrying a valuable box that I had purchased in the Trantor Zone. Inside the gates of Canarsa, the houses were round and the streets were empty. A hooded figure greeted us and gestured for us to follow. The figure was covered in a coarse, shiny fiber that looked like sacking, and underneath the hood was a horrifying creature that did not resemble anything human. Carol warned me that the Silent Ones were deaf and dumb, but also dangerous. We entered an open hut made of reeds, which was not a recognizable shape to my human eyes. Carol whispered that the hut would be torn down and burned after we left, as we had contaminated it too greatly for any of the Silent Ones to enter again. 2 Silent Ones slithered into the hut, covered in the same coarse, shiny material as the hooded figure. The trading was strange and unlike anything I had ever experienced before. I laid out the small forged steel tools and the coils of thin, fine wire, while Carol unpacked his lenses and laid them out in neat rows. The Silent One stood motionless, not uttering a word. Through a thin place in the grey veil, I saw a speck that might have been a phosphorescent eye, moving back and forth as if scanning the things laid out for their inspection. Suddenly, blank spaces appeared in the rows of merchandise. Certain small tools, wire cutters, calipers, surgical scissors, had vanished, and all the coils of wire had disappeared. Blanks equally had appeared in the rows of lenses. All of my tiny, powerful microscope lenses had vanished. Carol seemed unsurprised. I recalled vague rumors of the Silent Ones, and concluded that, eerie though it seemed, this was merely their way of doing business. Carol pointed at one of the tools, an exceptionally fine pair of binocular lenses, and the last of the coils of wire. The lenses and the wire vanished, but the small tool remained. In the blank spaces, little points of light began to glimmer, and after a moment, blue and red and green gemstones appeared there. To me, the substitution appeared roughly equitable and fair. Carol scowled slightly and pointed to one of the green gems, and after a moment it whisked away, and a blue one took its place. In another spot where a fine set of surgical instruments had lain, Carol pointed at the blue gem which now lay there, shook his head, and held out 3 fingers. After a moment, a second blue stone lay winking beside the first. Carol did not move, but inexorably held out the 3 fingers. There was a little swirling in the air, and then both gems vanished, and the case of surgical instruments lay in their place. Still, Carol did not move, but held the 3 fingers out for a full minute. Finally, he dropped them and bent to pick up the case of instruments. Again the little swirl in the air, and the instruments vanished. In their place lay 3 of the blue gems. Evidently, bargaining with the Silent Ones was not a great deal different than bargaining with anyone anywhere. Nevertheless, under the eyes of those shrouded but horrible forms, I had no impulse to protest their offered prices. I gathered up the rejected lenses, repacked them neatly, and helped Carol recrate the tools and instruments the Silent Ones had not wanted. They had taken all the fine wire, and I couldn't imagine, and didn't particularly want to imagine, what they intended to do with it. As we walked back through the streets, Carol's tongue was loosened, and he spoke freely. "They're psychokinetics," he told me. "Quite a few of the non-human races are. I guess they have to be, having no eyes and no hands. But sometimes I wonder if we of the dry towns ought to deal with them at all." "What do you mean?" I asked, not really paying attention. My mind was preoccupied with the way the small objects had melted away and reappeared. It stirred an uncomfortable memory, a vague sense of danger. It wasn't tangible enough for me to know why I feared it, but just a subliminal uneasiness that kept prodding at me, like a tooth that isn't quite aching yet. Kirill said, "We of Shainsa live between fire and flood. Terror on the one hand, and on the other maybe something worse, who knows? We know so little about the Silent Ones, and those like them. Who knows? Maybe we're giving them the weapons to destroy us." He broke off with a gasp and stood staring down one of the streets. I followed his gaze and saw the girl. Her hair was like spun black glass, falling in hard waves around her shoulders. Her red eyes smiled with alien malice, alien mischief, beneath the dark crown of little stars. And the toad god sprawled in hideous embroideries across the white folds of her breast. Kirill gulped hoarsely. His hand flew up as he clutched the charms strung about his neck. I imitated the gesture mechanically, watching Kirill, wondering if he would turn and run again. But he stood frozen for a minute. Then the spell broke, and he took one step toward the girl, arms outstretched. "Mielin!" he cried, and there was heartbreak in his voice, and again the cry making ringing echoes in the strange street. "Mielin! Mielin!" This time it was the girl who whirled and fled. Her white robes fluttered, and I saw the twinkle of her flying feet as she vanished into a space between the houses, and was gone. Kirill took one blind step down the street, then another. But before he could burst into a run, I had him by the arm, dragging him back to sanity. "Man, you've gone mad! Chase in a non-human town!" He struggled for a minute. Then, with a harsh sigh, he said, "It's all right, I won't," and shook loose from my arm. He did not speak again until we reached the gates of Canarsa, and they closed, silently and untouched, behind us. I had forgotten the place already. I had space only to think of the girl, whose face I had not forgotten since the moment when she saved me and disappeared. Now she had appeared again to Kirill. "What did it all mean?" I asked, as we walked toward the camp. "Do you know that girl?" But I knew the question was futile. Kirill's face was closed, conceding nothing, and his friendliness had vanished completely. He said, "Now I know you. You rescued me from those cat-like beings, and once more in Canarsa. As a result, I am unable to harm you. However, it is wicked to engage with individuals who have been influenced by the toad god." He spat loudly on the earth, glared at me with disgust, and declared, "We shall arrive at Shainsa in 3 days. Keep your distance from me."